My name is Marcus Washington, but everyone calls me Mark. I'm 74 years old now, living right here in Shreveport, Louisiana, where I've spent my whole life. I worked 50 years as an industrial mechanic and hydraulic specialist, fixing everything from oil field equipment to municipal water systems. These days I live on my pension and Social Security, keeping myself busy with small projects. When people ask how retirement is treating me, I say it's peaceful. But peace is a funny word, because after what happened, it took years for any real calm to settle in my chest. You think you know someone inside and out, every habit and thought, and then one day you discover you didn't know them at all. That's what happened to me after 45 years married to the same woman. I never thought I'd tell this story publicly, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it as a warning. You spend decades building trust, believing in people with your whole heart, and sometimes one small decision changes absolutely everything. For me, it was a trip I canceled at the last minute. If I had gone through with it as planned, I might still be living in that comfortable delusion. But fate had other plans. It wanted me to see the truth. It was April of 2020. I was 69 years old at the time. Patricia and I had been married for 45 years, raised 2 children, and built our house on land my father left me when he passed. That month, I needed to drive up to Houston, Texas, to see my brother Vernon, who'd been having health problems. Patricia wasn't planning to come because she said she had obligations with her church auxiliary group, which seemed normal enough. She even mentioned she'd use my absence to deep clean the house and donate some of my old clothes I never wore. I had traveled alone before. She stayed home. I never questioned it. The trip was set for a Thursday. I was planning to be gone for 1 week. Wednesday night, I packed my duffel bag and lined up my blood pressure medication. Patricia even baked a pound cake for me to take to Vernon because he always loved her baking. In the early morning hours, I got a call from my nephew saying Vernon had been admitted to the hospital and I should postpone my visit for a few days. I was worried, naturally, but I understood there was no point driving 5 hours if I couldn't even see my brother due to hospital restrictions. That's when I got what I thought was a clever idea. Instead of telling Patricia the trip was off, I'd surprise her. Our marriage had grown routine lately, that kind of distance that creeps in after so many years. I thought I'd pretend to leave for the trip anyway, and come back at the end of the day with flowers and a nice gift. I'd cook her favorite meal, open a bottle of wine, make it romantic. What a foolish idea for a 69-year-old man, right? But at the time, it seemed brilliant. What I didn't know was that this single decision would change everything in my life, and not for the better. It was the side you never expect to see, the one you can't even imagine exists. Sometimes you live your entire life next to someone and think you know every corner of their mind. But there are things only God truly sees. If you're enjoying my story so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my future stories. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It makes this old man happy to know what corner of the world is listening. I was born right here in Shreveport back in 1951, when everything was different than it is now. My father, James Washington, worked at the oil refinery and owned a small piece of property where we grew vegetables for the table. There were 4 of us kids, Vernon, me, Denise, and little Raymond. I was the second oldest. Our house was a simple wooden structure with a gas heater that ran constantly in winter to fight off the Louisiana cold and damp. Life wasn't easy, but it was good. My mother, Ruby Washington, made the best smothered chicken and dirty rice I've ever tasted in my life. She also prepared traditional Sunday suppers with cornbread dressing and greens that you only get down here in the South. The biggest treat was when we had extra money and she'd make a sweet potato pie. We'd eat it warm with cold milk from the icebox. I went to Washington Elementary up through 6th grade, which was about 1.5 miles from our house. I walked there every day with my siblings. When it rained hard, we wrapped ourselves in plastic trash bags my mama saved, but we'd still arrive soaked. In the coldest months, there were days we couldn't go at all because the roads got too bad. The teachers understood. It was like that for most families. They knew we were needed at home. It was around that time, I must have been about 10 years old in 1961, that I discovered what I wanted to do with my life. My daddy took me to Henderson's garage, where old man Calvin Henderson worked on cars and machinery. We needed a pump repaired. I was absolutely fascinated watching that powerful man diagnosing engine problems, the way his hands moved with confidence, the sound of metal tools on metal parts. I looked at my father and said, "One day I'm going to do that." "Daddy." James smiled and said, "If that's what you want, boy, you'll have to work for it." And work I did when I turned 13 in 1964. I started working as a helper at Henderson's after school and on Saturdays. At first, I just swept the garage floor, organized tools, and ran errands. But gradually, old man Calvin taught me the trade. He didn't have sons, only 3 daughters, and I think he saw in me someone to pass his knowledge to. "Mark, you got to understand that machinery is like people," he'd say in his gruff voice. "It tells you what's wrong if you know how to listen. You just got to pay attention." I remember during the State Fair of Louisiana, Mr. Henderson always invited me to eat with his family. The table would be loaded with barbecue, potato salad, baked beans, cornbread, sweet tea, and different kinds of homemade desserts. His wife, Miss Dorothy, treated me like one of her own children. In 1967, when I was 16, we had terrible flooding around Shreveport. The Red River overflowed and many people lost everything. Our house, thankfully, was on higher ground, but Henderson's garage was completely flooded. I spent 3 weeks helping him salvage what we could. Many tools were rusted. Equipment had to be rebuilt. It was a difficult time, but it was also when he told me, "Mark, you're not just a helper anymore. You're my right hand." That was one of the proudest days of my young life. By the time I was 18 in 1969, I had learned just about everything Mr. Henderson could teach me. I started handling jobs on my own, diagnosing problems, rebuilding carburetors, fixing hydraulic systems. People in the area started asking for me specifically. "Get the Washington boy to look at it," they'd say. That made Mr. Henderson proud, not jealous. "That's how it should be," he'd tell me. Around that time, the oil industry in Louisiana was booming, demanding specialized mechanics, and we began focusing on that kind of work. We adapted equipment, created solutions for contractors and drilling companies. Sometimes a foreman would come in with just an idea, and we'd figure out how to make it work. It wasn't all work, of course. On weekends, we'd gather to play dominoes at the recreation center, drink beer during crawfish boils, or attend church socials where there'd be music and dancing. I wasn't the partying type. I was always more reserved, but I enjoyed being around friends, sharing stories, and laughing. In those days, without all the modern entertainment we have now, fun was simple but genuine. In 1971, when I was 20, I experienced my first great loss. Mr. Henderson had a massive heart attack while working under a truck. I was right there beside him when it happened. I saw him grab his chest and collapse. I ran for help, but by the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. I lost not just a mentor, but a second father. Miss Dorothy called me after the funeral and said, "Mark, Calvin wanted you to have the garage. It was his dream to see you carry on the work." She offered to sell me his share in payments I could afford. It was a huge responsibility to take on the business alone at just 20 years old, but I couldn't let Mr. Henderson's legacy die. So I became the owner of Henderson's Garage, though everyone started calling it Washington soon after. Still just a young man with his whole life ahead of him, my father supported my decision. He could see that I wasn't suited for refinery work like my brother Vernon. Denise and Raymond went different directions too, both eventually moving to Atlanta for better opportunities. I was the one who stayed, the one who chose to root down deep in Shreveport. My father would tell me, "Every man's got to follow what his heart tells him, son." Your heart was always in that garage. It was in 1973, at 22 years old, that I met Patricia. She had moved from Houston to work as a nurse at Willis-Knighton Hospital. Shreveport was growing then. The medical center was expanding and more healthcare workers were needed. Patricia came to work in the surgical unit. She was a striking young woman with straightened hair she wore in a bun, warm brown eyes, and a gentle way of speaking that caught my attention the first day I saw her. I remember it like it was yesterday. She came into the garage driving a Plymouth Duster with a knocking sound in the engine. "Are you the mechanic?" she asked, looking a little surprised that I was so young and that I owned the place. "Yes, ma'am, that's me. Marcus Washington, but everybody calls me Mark," I answered. "You don't need to call me ma'am. I'm not that much older than you," she said with a laugh that warmed something in my chest. I fixed her engine, replaced a worn bearing, and when she came back to pick up the car, I asked if she'd like to get coffee at Strawn's, which was right down the street. It was the gathering spot for everyone in Shreveport. They served the best coffee in town with their famous strawberry icebox pie. She accepted, and that was the first of many conversations we had. Patricia was different from the women I knew growing up. She had been to nursing school. She was educated and professional. She talked about medicine and patient care, things I barely understood. But she never made me feel less for it. On the contrary, she was interested in my work, asking how I diagnosed problems, wanting to know Mr. Henderson's story and how I had learned the trade. We started dating that summer, and at first it was complicated. Her parents back in Houston didn't like the idea of their nurse daughter dating a mechanic from a small garage in Shreveport. But Patricia was determined. "They'll have to accept it because I chose you," she'd tell me. Over time, when they got to know me better, her family finally came around. They saw that even though I didn't have formal education, I was hardworking and honest. Our courtship lasted 2 years. They were good times of discovery and dreams. We walked hand in hand through the neighborhoods, went to community fish fries and church picnics. We participated in Mardi Gras celebrations in Shreveport, nothing like the big parades in New Orleans, but fun nonetheless. Everyone knew we were a couple. In 1975, at 24 years old, I asked Patricia to marry me. I bought a simple gold band, the best my money could afford at the time, and took her to the riverfront park near the Red River. It was autumn. The weather was cooling down. The sun was setting orange and purple. I got down on one knee right there by the water and asked her to be my wife. She cried, hugged me tight, and said yes. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. We got married in December 1975, me at 24 and her at 23. It was a ceremony at Mount Canaan Baptist Church, our tradition. Afterward, we had a reception at the church fellowship hall with fried catfish, gumbo, jambalaya, potato salad, and cold beer. A local blues band played, and we danced until late. Our honeymoon was in New Orleans. Just 4 days because I couldn't keep the garage closed too long. We started our life together in a small rental house near the garage. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Patricia continued working at the hospital, and I worked harder than ever. Shreveport was growing. More businesses needed equipment maintenance. More people were building houses that needed plumbing and electrical work where I could help with the mechanical side. The work never stopped. Thank the Lord. In 1978, when I was 27, we managed to buy our first piece of land. It was a decent-sized lot in what is now considered a good part of Shreveport, but back then it was still developing. We built slowly. First a large shed that served as my new workshop, then the house itself. Every brick of that house I laid with my own 2 hands after a full day at the garage. Patricia helped too, painting walls, planting the yard, transforming that place into our home. It was a time of hard work, but also great unity. We had a common dream: build a stable life, have our children, and be happy with what God gave us. At night, after exhausting days, we'd sit on the small porch, drink sweet tea, look at the stars, and plan our future. Patricia would talk about her patients, and I'd tell her about the jobs coming in. We lived one day at a time. In 1979, at 28 years old, I got an offer to expand my business. A construction company out of Baton Rouge wanted me to maintain their heavy equipment fleet. It was a big step. It meant hiring employees and buying specialized tools. I talked a lot with Patricia about it. She, always the more educated one, helped me work through the numbers and calculate the risks. "If this is what you want, Mark, I support you," she told me. Just like that, I went from being a small garage owner to running a legitimate mechanical services company. I hired 3 young men from the neighborhood who wanted to learn the trade like I had. I expanded the workshop and invested in hydraulic lifts and diagnostic equipment. The work doubled, the fatigue doubled, but the satisfaction of watching the business grow made it all worthwhile. Patricia sometimes joked, "I'm jealous of that garage, Mark. You spend more time there than you do with me." In 1980, at 29, we had our first great joy. We found out Patricia was pregnant. We had been trying for a while, and when the doctor confirmed it, we celebrated. She continued working at the hospital until her 7th month, then took maternity leave. We prepared everything with so much care. I built the crib myself, solid oak with hand-rubbed finish. Patricia organized the nursery with yellow and green because we didn't know if it would be a boy or girl. Our first child, Andre, was born in March of 1981 when I was 30. A healthy, strong boy with a head full of black hair. I remember his first cry, the emotion of holding that tiny life in my rough, calloused hands. "You better take good care of him," Patricia said, exhausted but glowing in the hospital bed. Life changed completely with Andre's arrival. Patricia took time off work to care for him, and I worked extra hours at the garage to make up for the lost income, but I never complained. Every smile from my son, every milestone he reached, was worth all the effort. I'd come home tired, but always had energy to play with him, change his diapers, and rock him to sleep. Patricia said I was a soft father, and I was. No doubt about it. 3 years later, in 1984, when I was 33, came our second blessing. Patricia was pregnant again. This time it was calmer. We already had experience. We knew what to expect. Andre, at 3 years old, didn't quite understand what having a little sister meant, but we prepared him little by little. "You're going to be the big brother. You'll have to protect her and teach her things," I explained. He felt so proud. In September of 1984, our daughter Shanice was born. If Andre looked like me, Shanice was the portrait of her mother. Same eyes, same smile, a little princess who completed our family. The house that once seemed spacious now felt small with the children growing, toys everywhere, laughter filling every corner. It was beautiful chaos. The 1980s were years of stability for us. The business was doing well. Washington's mechanical services had built a solid reputation throughout the region. Sometimes we'd get contracts from as far as Dallas, Texas for specialized hydraulic work that only I knew how to handle properly. Patricia went back to nursing when Shanice turned 2, and we found a trustworthy woman, Miss Ernestine, who looked after the kids while we worked. It was a simple life, but a full one. At least that's what I believed back then. The 1990s arrived and brought changes to the country, but our life in Shreveport continued at a steady, comfortable pace. In 1991 and 40, the garage was a consolidated business. I had 7 employees, all trained by me, and we started specializing in oil field equipment, maintenance that was being contracted throughout Louisiana and East Texas. Andre, at 10 years old, already liked hanging around the workshop after school, slowly learning the way I had learned from Mr. Henderson. Shanice, at 7, was more attached to Patricia, always with books and school projects. Showing an intelligence that impressed her teachers. Patricia was promoted to charge nurse in the surgical unit in 1993 when I was 42. It was recognition of the dedicated work she had always done. I was proud of her, of our life together, of what we had built. Our house was fully finished now with a beautiful flower garden that Patricia tended on weekends and fruit trees in the back, pecan, fig, and even a persimmon tree that gave us enough fruit to make preserves. Nothing fancy, but comfortable, cozy, and ours. Traditions remained strong in our family. On Sundays, the house filled with visits from my siblings when they came to town and their children. I'd smoke ribs and brisket on a brick pit I built in the backyard, while the women prepared collard greens, mac and cheese, and that cornbread dressing that only we know how to make right. The children played in the yard, and we adults drank beer, talked about life, and told old stories that the kids had heard 100 times but always wanted to hear again. In 1996, when I was 45, a major storm hit our area. WORSE than anything we'd seen in decades. Heavy rains flooded parts of Shreveport that had never been affected before. Our house, thankfully, was safe, but the workshop, which was in a lower area, got hit hard. We lost equipment, parts inventory, and jobs in progress. It was a serious blow, but the community came together. The employees, neighbors, church members, everyone helped with the cleanup and recovery. That's when I saw the value of having built good relationships over the years. Patricia was tireless during that period. She organized fundraisers at the church, secured donations of tools and materials, and worked hard balancing her hospital shifts with helping me rebuild the business. The kids did their part too. Andre, at 15, worked beside me like a grown man, and Shanice, at 12, helped her mother with organizing the donation drives. That tragedy, as difficult as it was, ended up bringing our family even closer. In 1997, we managed not only to recover what we lost, but to improve it. I rebuilt the workshop on higher ground with better drainage. We expanded the space and bought more modern diagnostic equipment. The business grew so much that I needed to hire 4 more employees. I didn't work with my hands as much as I used to. I had become more of a manager and estimator, but I still made sure to get under a hood every once in a while, especially when a particularly challenging job came up. That was what I loved most. Time kept moving forward, and the children kept growing. Andre graduated high school in 1999 when I was 48 and decided he wanted to stay in the mechanical field. "Dad, I want to study mechanical engineering," he told me. It was such a source of pride. My father had barely been able to give me a basic education, and I was able to send my son to Louisiana Tech University in Ruston. Shanice was still in high school, but already showed interest in healthcare and biology. Following in her mother's footsteps. As we entered the year 2049, our life seemed perfect. Patricia and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary with a beautiful party where we renewed our vows. She looked stunning that day in a burgundy dress that brought out her complexion. Our children, relatives, and friends we had made over the years were all there celebrating with us. I remember looking around during the party and thinking, we made it. Everything we dreamed of so long ago is right here. In 2003, when I was 52, Andre graduated and came back to Shreveport. He had received job offers from engineering firms in Houston, but he chose to come home and work with me. I want to modernize the company. Dad, there's a lot I learned that can help us grow even more. He told me with that enthusiasm of a freshly graduated young man. And that's what we did. His engineering knowledge combined with my practical experience gave the business a new boost. We started bidding on larger contracts, municipal projects, even some work for the Port of Shreveport. Shanice, on the other hand, chose a different path. In 2004, at 20, she got accepted to nursing school at LSU Health Sciences Center in Shreveport. She lived at home and commuted to classes. I prefer the peace of home to dorm life, she'd say. Patricia helped her with assignments, quizzed her before exams, and discussed patient care scenarios. It was beautiful to see the two of them together, so similar in the way they thought and spoke. Our routine at that time was steady. I left early for the workshop, now called Washington Mechanical and Hydraulics. Patricia left for the hospital, and the children left for their commitments. We met in the evening for dinner, always together at the table, talking about how the day went. On weekends, sometimes we'd go fishing at Cross Lake or drive up to Shreveport's riverboat casinos just to walk around and have dinner. Other times we'd drive to Houston to visit Patricia's family or to Dallas to see shows and museums. In 2008, when I was 57, Shanice graduated and started working at the same hospital where her mother had worked for over 30 years. It was another reason to be proud, seeing my daughter following Patricia's footsteps with the same dedication and compassion for patients. Patricia, who was 56 then, was already talking about retiring in a few years. And the idea was that Shanice would be well established in her career by then, that same year. Andre, at 27, met Jasmine, a young woman from Monroe, Louisiana, who had come to work at a consulting firm in Shreveport. They started dating, and we soon saw it was serious. He always brought her to Sunday dinners, and she fit right into the family. She helped in the kitchen, learned to make our traditional dishes, got along well with Patricia and Shanice. In 2010, they got married. A beautiful celebration at the Church Fellowship Hall, just like ours had been decades before. Life continued its natural course. In 2012, at 61, I became a grandfather for the first time. Jasmine gave birth to Isaiah, a beautiful baby boy who looked just like Andre when he was born. The following year came little Zara. They were the joy of our house. Patricia melted around the grandkids. She spoiled them constantly. I joke, "Woman, you're spoiling those children rotten." But deep down, I was the same way. I built Isaiah a wooden toy garage with little cars and made Zara a playhouse in the backyard. Old age was arriving gently with these little joys. Shanice found her partner too. In 2013, when I was 62, she started dating Malcolm, a physical therapist who came from Baton Rouge to work at the Rehabilitation Center in Shreveport. He was a serious, athletic young man from a good family. At first, I found him a bit too quiet, different from our more outgoing way. But over time, I saw that he was a good man who truly loved my daughter. They got married in 2015, a smaller ceremony than Andre's, but just as meaningful. Patricia retired in 2016. When I was 65, after more than 40 years dedicated to nursing, they threw her a retirement party at the hospital with former colleagues and even some patients whose lives she'd touched over the decades. It was very moving to see the impact she had made. I was so proud of my wife, the partner I had chosen for life. As for me, I had already passed most of the daily operations to Andre, but I still went to the workshop almost every day. I can't just sit around doing nothing, I'd say. I liked talking to the long-time customers, giving advice here and there, seeing the business that started so small, now employing nearly 25 people. It was satisfying, a feeling of a job well done. Our days were calmer. Patricia now dedicated herself to the garden, her church activities, and the grandkids who came to spend afternoons with us. I had more time to fish, to meet my buddies at the lodge, where we played cards and reminisced about old times. Sometimes we traveled to places we'd never had time to visit before. We went to Memphis, Savannah, even made it to Charleston on a tour organized by the church. It was a good phase, harvesting what we'd sown over so many years. The years remained peaceful until 2018. When I was 67, it was that year I began to notice subtle changes in Patricia. Small things, nothing that made me suspect anything serious at first, but strange enough to catch my attention. She, who had always been a homebody after retirement, started going out more. At first, they were normal activities. A quilting circle with church ladies on Wednesdays, volunteering at the food bank on Thursdays, a book discussion group on Saturdays. It all seemed legitimate. And I even thought it was good that she had her own activities in retirement. "It's good you've got your things to do, Patricia," I'd tell her. "After so many years working, you deserve to enjoy yourself." And she would smile, kiss my cheek, and say, "It's good to keep the mind active. Mark, can't just sit around waiting for time to pass." But little by little, things started popping up that didn't quite add up. Once she said she was going to the book group, and when I mentioned it the next day to Miss Charlene, our neighbor who also participated, she seemed confused. "But there wasn't a meeting yesterday, Mr. Mark. It was canceled because Sister Joyce, who was supposed to lead the discussion, had a family emergency." When I asked Patricia about it, she quickly changed the subject. "Oh, I must have gotten my days mixed up. You know how it is." Another time, she came home with a beautiful new outfit, different from the style she usually wore. When I complimented her, she seemed a little uneasy, as if she didn't want to draw attention to it. "The ladies at church talked me into buying it. They said it was on clearance," she explained quickly, hanging it in the back of the closet. I also noticed she started taking more care with her appearance. It's not that she was careless before, but now she went to the salon more often, started getting her hair colored more regularly, bought new makeup and skin products. "Well, now I have time to take better care of myself," she justified when I commented. By the end of 2018, Patricia started keeping her cell phone constantly nearby. Before, she barely used the thing. She'd leave it on the kitchen counter or in her purse for hours. Sometimes she wouldn't even hear it ring. Now the phone was always with her. She even took it to the bathroom when she showered. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and she wasn't in bed. I found her in the dark living room, the glow of her phone screen lighting up her face as she typed messages. When I asked what she was doing, she startled, nearly dropping the phone. "Oh, Mark, you scared me half to death. It's Shanice. She's having trouble sleeping, and we're texting." The next day, I casually asked our daughter if she was having insomnia. She looked puzzled. "No, Daddy, I've been sleeping fine." "Why do you ask?" I didn't tell her about her mother's late-night texting session. I didn't want to cause problems or seem like a paranoid old man. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding, but the small inconsistencies kept piling up. In February of 2019, when I was 68, Patricia announced she was going to start taking computer classes in Houston. "I don't want to be left behind with all this technology," she said. The class would be twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. It seemed reasonable. I even offered to drive her to the Greyhound station on class days. But after a few weeks, I got a call from Terrence, an old friend who lives in Houston. He had run into me at a gas station and called to catch up. During the conversation, I mentioned I was heading back from dropping Patricia at her computer class. What class is that? My wife Linda took all kinds of senior classes at the community center, and she never mentioned a computer class, he said, sounding puzzled. That stuck in my head. When Patricia came back that evening, I asked her for details about the class, where exactly it was located, who else was in it, what they were learning. She answered everything without hesitation, describing the instructor and the curriculum. But there was something in her eyes that didn't convince me. That night, while she was sleeping, I looked through her purse for any materials from the supposed class. I didn't find anything. No notebooks, no handouts, no flash drives, nothing to indicate she was actually studying computers. The following week, I faked a backache and said I couldn't drive her to the station. No problem, she replied quickly. I can catch the bus on your redrive. After she left, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I decided to follow her. I asked Deshawn, one of my most trusted employees, to drive me in his pickup truck. We kept our distance, watching her board the Houston-bound bus. We followed that bus all the way to the terminal in Houston. In Houston, Patricia didn't head to any community college or senior center. Instead, she walked into a small upscale cafe in the Midtown area. From inside the truck, at a safe distance, I watched a man approach her table. He was a well-dressed gentleman, maybe about 65, with salt and pepper hair and expensive-looking clothes. They greeted each other with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Nothing overly intimate, but familiar. It could be just a friend, I told myself. They stayed there talking for nearly 2 hours, laughing, leaning in close. I sat in that truck with Deshawn, feeling my chest tighten with every passing minute. You want me to go over there, Mr. Mark? Deshawn asked, seeing my distress. No, I replied, my voice tight. Let's go. I've seen enough. We drove back to Shreveport before Patricia could spot us. The whole 3-hour drive back, I stayed quiet, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. I hadn't seen anything explicitly romantic. It could be an innocent meeting with an old friend. But why the lie about the class? When she returned home that evening, I acted normal, as if nothing had happened. I asked about the class, and she told the same story as always, with details about what they'd supposedly learned that day. The lie came out so naturally that it disturbed me even more. Was I overreacting? Could that man really be someone innocent? In the following weeks, I became more observant, watching her every move. I noticed that on the days of the class, she came back with a different energy, more animated, younger somehow. Sometimes she brought home small gifts for me, as if compensating for something. I saw this in a shop window and thought of you, she'd say, handing me a new fishing lure or my favorite PRA LINES dot in April of 2019. Patricia surprised me with an announcement. I'm going to start joining a seniors travel group. They organize short trips to nearby cities. The first one is to San Antonio next month. This was new. She had never shown interest in traveling without me before. When I asked if I could come along, she explained it was a women-only group, just a ladies' thing, as she put it. The trip to San Antonio lasted 4 days. We talked on the phone a couple of times. She sent photos of the Riverwalk and the Alamo. Everything seemed normal. But when she came back, I noticed she had a new bracelet, a delicate silver piece that wasn't in any of the photos she'd sent. The ladies in the group all bought matching ones, she explained when I spotted it. The following month, June of 2019, came another travel announcement, this time to Austin, Texas for a music festival. Again, it was with the women's group. This time I asked for the organizer's contact information, saying I wanted to be sure she'd be safe. Patricia was visibly uncomfortable with my request, but she ended up giving me a name and number. I called, and a very friendly woman confirmed the existence of the group and the trip. Later, I found out she was a friend of Patricia's from church who had agreed to back up the story if I called. The trips with the group became regular, one every 2 or 3 months. After each return, Patricia seemed more distant, as if a part of her had been left somewhere else. Our relationship, which had always been close despite the years, began to cool. We talked less, rarely went out together anymore, and even our physical intimacy had diminished considerably. In October of 2019, I accidentally found a credit card statement of hers. There were charges at a boutique hotel in Lafayette, Louisiana, on a weekend when she was supposed to have been home with me. I confronted her, and she said it was an error by the credit card company, that she'd already called to dispute it. I accepted the explanation, more out of wanting to believe her than actually believing it. By the end of 2019, our son Andre noticed the change between us. "Is everything all right with you and Mom?" he asked me one day when we were alone at the workshop. I lied and said yes, it was just the weariness of getting older. I didn't want to involve the children in my suspicions, especially since I had no concrete proof. Just hints, strange behaviors, inconsistencies. Christmas that year was tense. We were all gathered, us, the children, the grandchildren. But there was an awkwardness in the air that had never existed before. Patricia was physically present, but her mind seemed elsewhere. She checked her phone constantly, smiling at the screen as if she had a private secret. Our children exchanged worried glances, sensing something was wrong between their parents. I entered 2020 with a heavy heart, an uncertainty gnawing at me from within. In March, when we celebrated 45 years of marriage, I thought about giving her a surprise, an attempt to reignite what seemed to be fading. I made reservations at her favorite steakhouse in Shreveport, bought flowers, planned everything carefully. Patricia seemed genuinely touched, and for a few hours it was like old times. She held my hand across the table, looked into my eyes, and said, "It's been 45 wonderful years, Mark." The past tense didn't escape my notice, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was then, in early April of 2020, that the trip to visit my brother Vernon in Houston came up. He really was sick with heart problems, and I really had planned to go see him. Patricia, as had become her habit lately, said she wouldn't come with me, that she had commitments in Shreveport. I didn't question it. I was used to her refusals by then. On the eve of the trip, I received the call from my nephew, saying Vernon had been admitted to the hospital, and it was better to postpone the visit. That's when I had the idea that would change everything. Pretend I had left anyway, and come back the same day to surprise Patricia. Part of me genuinely wanted to make a romantic gesture, to try to save our marriage. But another part, the one that had been accumulating suspicions for months, wanted to finally discover the truth. And so I came to that fateful day. The decision to fake a trip to find out what was happening with my 45-year marriage. Little did I know that the truth would be far more devastating than all my suspicions combined. On the morning of April 16th, 2020, a Thursday, I left the house with my duffel bag packed. I said goodbye to Patricia with a quick peck on the cheek, as had become our routine lately. "Take good care of Vernon. Tell him I'm praying for him," she said, sounding genuinely concerned about my brother. "I'll be back next Wednesday," I replied. Feeling a knot in my throat from the lie, I got in my truck and drove off. But instead of heading toward Interstate 20 East to Houston, I went straight to the workshop. I had already arranged everything with Andre. He knew I wasn't traveling, but he didn't know the real reason. I just told him I wanted to surprise his mother, maybe rekindle the romance that had cooled off. My son, always understanding, didn't ask many questions. "You need any help with anything, Dad?" he offered. "No, son, I'm good. Just don't mention you saw me around today," I requested. I stayed at the workshop until noon, tinkering with a carburetor rebuild more to kill time than out of necessity. I ate a bowl of gumbo at Ruby's Kitchen down the street, where nobody would question my presence since I ate there often. Then I went to the Brookshires and bought supplies for the surprise I was planning. A bottle of Merlot that Patricia liked. Ingredients for shrimp etouffee I'd recently learned to make halfway decent. And a bouquet of mixed flowers I ordered from the florist next door at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I headed home. I parked the truck 2 blocks away to avoid making noise. With my heart pounding, I used my key to enter through the back door quietly. I still remember the feeling of that April heat on my back, the smell of gardenia from our bushes, the sound of mourning doves in the neighbor's oak tree. Details that got burned into my memory from a moment that would change my life forever. The house was silent. I called out softly, "Patricia?" No answer. Her car wasn't in the carport, which struck me as odd. She rarely went out on Thursday afternoons. That was when she usually watched her cooking shows and worked on her quilting projects. I put the groceries in the kitchen and went to the bedroom. The bed was made. Everything was in order. In the bathroom, I noticed that some of her toiletries and makeup weren't in their usual spots. I went back to the living room, confused. Maybe she went to the store or was visiting a friend. I decided to wait. I sat on the couch and turned on the television, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. The minutes crawled by. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. The sun began to set, and still Patricia hadn't arrived. I started to worry. What if something had happened to her? I picked up my phone and called her cell. It went straight to voicemail. I called Shanice. "Honey, do you know where your mother is?" She sounded surprised. "I thought you were in Houston, Daddy. Mom didn't say anything about going out today." I made up an excuse, saying I'd called home to check in, and nobody answered. I called a few of Patricia's church friends, but nobody knew where she was. Or at least that's what they claimed. Looking back now, some of them seemed evasive, uncomfortable with my questions. At 8 o'clock that night, I decided to call the Shreveport Police Department non-emergency line. The officer who answered, someone I didn't know, told me what I already expected. "Sir, it hasn't been 24 hours yet. Adults have the right to go where they please. If she's not back by tomorrow evening, then come file a report." I went to bed anxious, unable to sleep. I sat in the recliner watching the door, waiting to hear her car pull up. Nothing got done broke, and I was still alone. I called her phone again, still off. I was about to drive to the police station when I remembered something. Her planner. Patricia always kept a small day planner where she wrote appointments and important phone numbers. I went to the drawer in the kitchen where she kept those things. The planner was there. I started flipping through it, looking for anything that might indicate where she could be. On the page for this week, I found one notation for Thursday. R.C. Just those initials. No other information. Who was R.C.? I kept flipping backward, and on several previous dates, I found the same notation. R.C. Always on days when she'd said she had commitments outside the house. That's when I remembered the man I'd seen with her at that cafe in Houston months before. Could he be this R.C.? I went to the back pages, looking for more clues. On the inside back cover of the planner, I found a phone number written in pencil with no name beside it. With trembling hands, I dialed the number on our landline. A man answered on the second ring, a smooth, educated voice. "Hello?" I stayed silent, not knowing what to say. "Hello, who is this?" The voice insisted with slight irritation. I hung up, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That voice seemed to confirm my worst suspicions. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there waiting. I called Deshawn and asked him to drive me to Houston. "We're going to check hotels in Houston," I told him without going into detail. We spent the entire morning driving from hotel to hotel. At each front desk, I showed a photo of Patricia on my phone, asking if she was a guest. In some places, I noticed flickers of recognition, but everyone denied having any record of her. It was at the Ninth Hotel, a nice boutique place in the museum district, that I got my first real lead. The desk clerk, a young man, hesitated when he saw the photo. "Is she registered as Patricia Washington?" he asked, checking his computer. "Yes," I replied, feeling my stomach drop. "No, sir, we don't have anyone by that name," he said after a moment. But his expression gave something away. "Please," I said, leaning closer. "She's my wife. I'm worried about her. If you know anything, I need you to tell me." The young man looked around as if checking that his manager wasn't nearby. "There is a lady who looks like her, but she checked in under the name Patricia Collins. She's in room 308. She checked in yesterday afternoon with a gentleman." Collins. That was Patricia's maiden name, the name she hadn't used in over 45 years. "Is she there now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The clerk shook his head. "They went out about an hour ago, but they left the key at the desk, so they're planning to come back." I thanked the young man and left the hotel with Deshawn. "You all right, Mr. Mark?" he asked, worried about how pale I'd gone. "No, I'm not all right," I answered honestly. "But I need to handle this. You can head back to Shreveport. I'll catch a bus back later." After Deshawn left, I crossed the street and went into a coffee shop where I could watch the hotel entrance. I ordered black coffee that sat untouched while I kept my eyes fixed on that door. Time moved like molasses. Noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. At 3:45 in the afternoon, I saw Patricia's silver Camry pull up in front of the hotel. My heart stopped when I saw her step out of the passenger side, laughing, looking happier and younger than I'd seen her in years. From the driver's side emerged a tall man with silver hair and sharp clothing, expensive looking. The same man from the cafe months ago. He came around and put his arm around her waist with an intimacy that only comes from considerable time together. Together they walked into the hotel, her head leaning against his shoulder. I was paralyzed, unable to move or think clearly. Part of me wanted to storm across that street and confront them right there in the lobby. Another part wanted to run away, pretend I'd never seen it, go back to my comfortable ignorance. But I knew I needed the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. I waited another hour, trying to build up my courage. Finally, I stood up, paid for the coffee I'd never touched, and crossed the street. At the front desk, the same young clerk gave me a look of sympathy. I didn't need to say anything. He just nodded slightly, confirming the couple was in the room. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, my legs feeling weak with every floor we climbed. I found room 308 and stopped in front of the door, my heart hammering so loud I thought they'd hear it through the walls. I raised my hand to knock, but then I heard her voice, my wife of 45 years, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in ages. "Robert, you are absolutely impossible," she said through bursts of laughter. Robert. So that was his name. RC in the planner. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The voices inside immediately went silent. After several long seconds, I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened partially, and there she was, my Patricia, with her hair down loose, wearing a silk blouse I'd never seen before. Her face went from curiosity to shock to pure panic in seconds flat. "Mark," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "What? How? You're supposed to be in Houston. Can I come in?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt inside. She hesitated, looked behind her, then opened the door wider. I walked into the room and saw the man, Robert Crawford, standing near the window, clearly uncomfortable. He was a distinguished-looking man, maybe about 68, dressed in a pressed polo shirt and slacks. So this is it? I said, looking from one to the other. All this time, all these trips, these classes, it was all lies? Patricia started to cry. Mark, I can explain. No need, I interrupted. I think it's pretty clear what's happening here. Robert took a step forward. Mr. Washington, I know this looks terrible, but you don't owe me explanations. I cut him off. I didn't even know I existed from the sound of it. That's when I noticed something strange about the look they exchanged. It wasn't just shame or guilt. There was something else, something I couldn't identify immediately. What do you mean? I asked, confused. What aren't you two telling me? Patricia sat on the edge of the bed, wiping her tears. Mark, this is Robert Crawford. I already figured that part out, I replied bitterly. What I want to know is why you're both looking at me so strangely. It was Robert who answered, his voice low and uncomfortable. Because until 3 weeks ago, I believed Patricia was a widow. The world seemed to stop at that moment. His words echoed in my head without making sense. A widow? I repeated, stunned. Patricia looked up at me. Shame and something like defiance mixed in her eyes. Yes, Mark, I told everyone here in Houston that I was a widow. That you, my husband, had died 3 years ago. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. You killed me? I asked, incredulous. How did you kill me? She sighed heavily. It was easier that way. I met Robert at a healthcare conference here in Houston shortly after I retired. We talked. He asked me to coffee. I enjoyed his company. But I knew I shouldn't. When things started getting more serious, I couldn't just say I was married. So I said I was a widow. And how did I die? I asked, a cold rage beginning to replace the shock. A stroke, she replied quietly. I told him you'd had a massive stroke, that it was sudden, but that I was moving forward with my life. Robert looked as shocked as I felt. Patricia, you told me you two had gone to a Saints game in New Orleans, and he collapsed in the parking lot. That the paramedics couldn't save him. It was all a lie, she admitted, now looking directly at me. Mark, I know it sounds awful, but I needed something just for me. After so many years taking care of everyone, the kids, you, my patients, I wanted something that was mine alone. Why didn't you just ask for a divorce? I asked, my voice shaking. Why this sick charade of killing me off in your imagination? She laughed then, a bitter sound without humor. A divorce in Shreveport? Everyone would judge me, talk behind my back. The children would be devastated. The reputation I built my whole life, all destroyed. It was easier to have 2 separate lives. Here in Houston, I was Patricia Collins, a respectable widow who found new love. In Shreveport, I remained Mrs. Patricia Washington, the faithful wife of Mark from the garage. The coldness with which she explained it left me speechless. I didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of me. Where was the young nurse I'd fallen in love with? The mother of my children? The partner of so many decades? Robert looked genuinely devastated. Mr. Washington, I swear I didn't know. If I'd known you were alive, that she was still married, I never would have gotten involved with Patricia. I believed him. The man seemed honest in his shock. He too had been deceived. How long have you two been together? I asked. 2.5 years, Robert answered after a pause. We met at a nursing conference in September 2017. I'm a retired hospital administrator from Houston. The timeline matched. That was exactly when I'd first noticed changes in Patricia's behavior. And you see each other how often? I continued, needing to understand the full extent of this betrayal. At first, once or twice a month, Robert said. Then it became more frequent. Patricia said she needed to come to Houston for retirement paperwork or to visit old colleagues. Sometimes I'd drive to meet her in Lafayette or Lake Charles for weekends. All those trips then? I stated flatly. Yes, Patricia confirmed. When I said I was going to San Antonio or Austin with the ladies' group, I was actually with Robert. But you also met here in Houston regularly, I added. She nodded. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, when I said I had computer classes. I looked around the room. 2 suitcases open, clothes hanging in the closet, toiletries spread on the bathroom counter. And this trip I was supposedly taking to see my brother? You two were planning to spend the whole week together? Another nod. Yes, we'd planned it months ago. Robert has a timeshare in Galveston. We were going to spend a week at the beach. And our children, I said, my voice breaking. Do they know about this double life? Of course not, she replied, horrified. They think I'm doing exactly what I told you. Classes, book clubs, trips with church friends. And your friends here in Houston? I turned to Robert. Do they all think she's a widow? Yes, Patricia answered before he could. The few people I know here believe that story. Robert looked sick. My daughters met Patricia last Christmas. They thought she was a wonderful widow who'd made me happy again after losing their mother 6 years ago. The situation was so absurd I almost laughed. So you have a whole life here. People who know you as the widow Patricia Collins, while in Shreveport, you're still Mrs. Patricia Washington, the mechanic's wife. She didn't answer, just looked down. Why, Patricia? I asked, my voice cracking completely now. Why didn't you just end things with me if you didn't love me anymore? Why all these elaborate lies? She looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Cold calculation. Because this way, I had the best of both worlds. In Shreveport, I had the respect of the community, the comfort of our home, closeness to the children and grandchildren. Here in Houston, I had the excitement of a new relationship, the freedom to be someone else without 45 years of history weighing on me. Those words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. And me? What was I in this whole arrangement? You were part of my Shreveport life, she said simply. The father of my children, grandfather to my grandchildren. I didn't want to hurt you. That's why I never said anything. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated in disbelief. You erased me from existence, Patricia. You killed me off in your imagination. How was that not going to hurt when I found out? I never thought you'd find out, she admitted quietly. And that, perhaps, was the only genuine truth she'd spoken. I left that hotel room in Houston a completely different man than the one who'd entered. I didn't say another word. I simply turned around and walked away, leaving Patricia and Robert with their secrets and lies. I took a Greyhound bus back to Shreveport, staring out the window without really seeing the passing landscape. 45 years of marriage, a whole life built together, and it had all been a facade, at least for the past few years. When I got home, Patricia still hadn't returned. I packed clothes in my old duffel bag, grabbed important documents and some photo albums, and left. I couldn't sleep under that roof anymore. I went to Andre's house. He was startled when I showed up at his door with a suitcase. Dad, what happened? Where's Mom? I sat him and Jasmine down and told them everything. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. I watched the disbelief in my son's eyes transform into anger, then profound sadness. It can't be true, he kept saying. Mom wouldn't do that. The next day, Shanice came over. They both wanted to hear their mother's side, naturally, but I had proof. The planner with the notations, the hotel clerk's information, even Deshawn who'd been with me during part of the search. When Patricia finally returned to Shreveport 2 days later, the children already knew everything. It was a terrible period. The family I'd built with so much love and care was shattered. Patricia tried to explain, to justify, but there was no explanation that could make sense of such an elaborate, cruel betrayal. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was a complete denial of my very existence, my life, my worth. I filed for divorce. At 69 years old, I found myself alone, having to rebuild everything from scratch. That the first months were brutal. I rented a small apartment near the workshop and threw myself into work. The children stood by me, but it was complicated for them too. After all, despite everything she'd done, she was still their mother. The news spread through Shreveport like wildfire. In a city this size, you can't hide something like that. I felt the pitying glances everywhere I went. I heard the whispers. To many people, I became poor old Mark, the man who'd been fooled by his wife Dot as for Robert Crawford. I later learned he also ended the relationship with Patricia. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, he was as devastated as I was to discover the depth of her deception. In the end, he too had been a victim. Believing he was in an honest relationship with a widow when he was actually an unwitting accomplice to an elaborate fraud, Patricia ended up moving to Houston permanently after the divorce was finalized. She sold her share of the house and bought a condo there. The children maintained contact with her, but things have never been the same. Family celebrations, Sunday dinners, all of that ended. We only see each other at unavoidable occasions, like the grandchildren's graduations or milestone birthdays. And even then, the atmosphere is strained. Time passed. And the pain, though it never completely disappeared, became more manageable. I learned to live alone, to find satisfaction in simple things. I started fishing more at Cross Lake, spending more time at the lodge with my buddies, and being present for my grandchildren when they visited. Today, 4 years after that devastating day, I can say I survived. I'm 74 years old, with more gray hair and fewer illusions, but I'm still standing. The workshop, now officially Washington Mechanical and Hydraulics, continues to thrive under Andre's leadership. I still go there almost every day, more to stay busy and socialize than to actually work. I never got romantically involved with anyone again. Not for lack of opportunity. There are several widows and divorcees in Shreveport who've made it clear they wouldn't mind keeping this old mechanic company. But something in me closed up after that experience. I prefer the simplicity of my current life. No complications. No expectations that can be shattered. The hardest lesson I learned is that sometimes you think you know someone completely, but we never truly know what's happening in another person's heart and mind. 45 years beside Patricia, and I never imagined she was capable of something like that. I never suspected the depth of her unhappiness, the void she felt that needed filling with another life, another identity. I also learned about forgiveness, not necessarily forgiving Patricia, but forgiving myself. For a long time, I blamed myself. What did I do wrong? When did I fail as a husband so badly that she needed to invent my death and create an alternate life? It took time to understand that we're not always responsible for others' choices. Some people change, their desires shift, and nothing we do can prevent that. Old age brings wisdom, but it also brings the awareness that time is too precious to live in bitterness. That's why I chose to move forward. I haven't forgotten. I don't pretend it didn't happen, but I refuse to let that betrayal define who I am or how I live whatever years. I have left. My children and grandchildren are my joy now. Andre follows in my footsteps with the business. Shanice continues her nursing career at the hospital. Isaiah is 13 now, already showing interest in mechanics, always asking me to teach him about engines. Zara at 12 wants to be a doctor. Who knows? Maybe Isaiah will be the third generation of Washingtons in the trade. If there's one thing I want to say to anyone listening, it's this: value truth. As painful as it may be, truth sets you free. Living a lie, even a comfortable one, is like building a house on sand. Eventually, everything collapses. Be honest with yourself and with those you love. If you're unhappy, if you want change, communicate. Seek solutions together. Don't create parallel lives. Don't symbolically murder someone who stood by you for decades. And remember, it's never too late to start over. At 69, I had to relearn how to live alone after nearly half a century of marriage. It was incredibly difficult. There were days I thought I wouldn't make it. But here I am, 4 years later, still standing, still finding reasons to smile, still grateful for every new day. Life is full of surprises, some good, some devastating. What matters is how we face them, what we learn, and how we keep going. Nobody goes through this world without scars. But those marks tell our story, show our strength, prove our capacity to overcome. If this story touched your heart or made you think, please hit that like button to brighten this 74-year-old man's day. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next stories, told with all my heart. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Have you faced a major betrayal in life? How did you find the strength to move forward? This grandfather is grateful to know who's on the other side listening, and what moment of your day you took time to hear my story.